Hi friends, this is Trish and welcome to Teacher Therapy. Today we're going to be talking about how to deal with difficult students. Now I know we've probably all heard the classic classroom management advice. We've all heard you just need to build relationships with students. We've heard be firm, be kind, be consistent, let the kids know that you care about them, be engaging, yet rigorous, be confident but not overbearing, be flexible, yet fair and firm. It kind of ends up feeling like we are walking a tightrope over the Grand Canyon. We don't want to fall over on one side or the other. So I just want to acknowledge how difficult it is these days to be a good classroom manager. It seems like kids are coming into the classroom with more challenges than ever before. It seems like parents are misbehaving more than ever before. And it feels like teachers are being less supported by administration, society, and the world than ever before. So I have to acknowledge that. But with all of that said, there are some things that teachers can do that will help make the situation less bad. I didn't say great, but less bad, you know? And I'm pretty sure I made all the mistakes that one can make with this topic, with classroom management, with students. But oddly enough, I was always considered and perceived to be a really excellent classroom manager for what it's worth. So without further ado, let's get started. So what exactly is a difficult student? They can come in all kinds of varieties, but usually it comes down to the fact that they are not cooperating, not following directions, disrupting the class, bothering other students, refusing to do assignments, refusing to work with their classmates, having a really bad attitude, being defiant and disrespectful, and sometimes causing chaos just for the fun of it. And every teacher has a different thing that really gets on their nerves. For me, defiance and disrespect was like the number one thing that really got on my nerves, in addition to doing anything that was disruptive to the learning environment of the class. Now, in the good old days, there may have been one disruptive kid per grade level. Now you might have 3 to 7 disruptive students in one class. Another huge issue that I noticed with teaching is that students were really coming to school with no motivation and no intention to learn or to work. And as we've talked about in some of my other videos, unfortunately, parents were sometimes reinforcing that. They weren't requiring their students to complete assignments. So when a student is coming to school not intending to learn, not intending to work, what's going to happen? They're going to misbehave. They're going to try to have fun at others' expense, usually the teachers. Now, in the good old days, there were really clear consequences for unacceptable behavior, but I feel like today, more so than any time, there's a lot of excuse making that happens for disruptive students, and oftentimes disruptive students seem to have more rights than all the students that are behaving. And of course, students' disruptive behavior is often blamed on the teacher. We're asked, why weren't we more engaging? We're asked if we were too boring. We're asked if we built a strong enough relationship with the student. We're asked what proactive strategies we used to make sure that the student didn't misbehave. And typically, instead of the arrow pointing at the student, the arrow points back at the teacher from the student, the parents, and the administration. And this is why managing a classroom and dealing with disruptive students is so hard. There's also a lot of societal and cultural changes that have happened, and it's so subtle. It's like that analogy of the frog that's like slowly getting boiled in water. I think some of these changes in culture have happened so slowly that now we're really facing a full boil and all the frogs are screaming. There are very few agreed upon societal norms at this point. In the past, it was generally agreed upon what is acceptable language to use in a formal setting like a classroom. What are acceptable clothes and attire for students and teachers to wear? What is appropriate behavior? How do we talk to people and treat people? But unfortunately, none of these things are agreed upon. So whenever a teacher tries to start enforcing any kind of standards, they're oftentimes having students argue with them, parents argue with them, parents complain to administration, and it's very likely that administration will come back to the teacher and say, you're being too strict, you need to change this. So that is why the simple formula of teacher sets the rules, teacher enforces the rules, student misbehavior is solved doesn't work as nicely as it used to be. I think it's also important to note that the kind of influences that students are getting today are really absolutely terrible. Their music, movies, social media, TikTok, all of these things are just anti-good behavior. You don't see people in modern entertainment being glorified for being kind, respectful, an upstanding moral citizen, a hard worker, a student, someone that achieves good grades. Like, that's literally laughable today. And that started when I was a kid. I know that, The Simpsons, that was like the big show that parents were saying, like, this is such a bad influence on kids. Look at how disrespectful the kids are. But that has gotten about 100 times worse with today's modern entertainment. Almost every show that I've seen, I feel like, has kids that are smarter than the adults, kids that are disrespecting adults, and kids that are breaking every rule possible with no consequences. So all of these things are subtly shaping the way the modern student thinks about life. And that's going to spill over to the classroom. And I think that there was a time where we could really talk to kids about college and their future and the value and benefit of education. But a lot of students are hearing so much hopelessness in the news from their parents, on social media, that they really have a mentality that they're going to live now and they're going to live for the moment and they're going to do what feels good to them, no matter how much it inconveniences other people. And these mentalities, behaviors, and attitudes are evident in really young kids. I taught between 4th and 8th grade. I've heard horror stories from some of my friends that even teach, kindergarten through 2nd grade, some of the things that kids are saying and doing and how they're behaving and just how completely out of control and disrespectful they are. All that to say, so many of teachers' former methods of controlling a classroom and go-to tools don't work as well today. Maybe in certain communities, maybe within certain cultural systems, they might still work, but by and large, it seems like that ship has sailed. The last thing I'll mention on the problem is the fact that a lot of kids are not used to having any kind of consequences for their behavior at home. So I know when I was growing up, kids were like, oh my gosh, I don't want the teacher to call home. I'll be grounded forever. Everything's going to get taken away. I'm going to be in so much trouble. I would hardly ever hear that as a teacher. In fact, a lot of times kids wanted to get their parents involved because they knew that their parents had the ability to get the teacher in trouble. So as a teacher, we hardly ever know if parents are going to be allies or whether they're going to be part of the problem. So that's another issue. So because of all of these things, in many contexts, not all, but many, classroom management and dealing with difficult students might be up to like half of your day and half of your energy every single day. In the olden days, I think you could teach kids basic rules and they might take a little while to adjust, like maybe a couple of weeks, but after a while, they're like, okay, this is the rules. This is my teacher. This is the structure and order that I'm expected to work with, and I'm going to do it. End of story. And if I don't, I'm going to be in trouble. If not with the school, then definitely at home, and all that's just gone. So classroom management has changed entirely, and teachers have to have a new set of skills that I think teachers in the past did not have to have because they had so much support from administration, support from parents, support from community, and that's gone for teachers today. Not to be overly depressing, just trying to keep it honest. So let's take a few minutes to talk about what not to do. This generation does not respond well to yelling or any form of attempted intimidation. For many of them, that will activate more rebellion, and also they will become very vindictive and try to make your life miserable. Another problem is they usually think it's funny, and you very well might end up getting recorded and uploaded to YouTube. So some of the more old-fashioned thinking about being a drill sergeant and laying down the law and scaring students into compliance really doesn't work very well these days because no one's going to support you. Like I said, parents aren't going to support you, the community's not going to support you, and the kids will be overjoyed to get you in trouble. So you're going to have to be very mindful of your tone because to a certain degree, students know that there's not a whole lot you can do. So pretending like you can do something is only going to end up being embarrassing for you. I can't tell you the amount of times where I tried to lay down a consequence only to have it deleted by an administrator. I would also highly suggest not embarrassing kids publicly or shaming them in any kind of way. So you're going to want to do your best to have one-on-one conversations with kids, even if they have to have lunch with you a few times so that you can really talk to them and explain what's going wrong wrong and how they're not meeting your expectations in a conversational way. But again, the old school methods, not that anybody does this, like nobody sits a kid on a chair and puts a dunce cap on their head, but any form of just like publicly shaming kids is not going to end well for you. Using the because I said so method will not work well either. This generation really does want to know the why behind everything, and they want to have some kind of ownership and feel like they're on board with things. They want things to feel like a democracy, even if they're not. So the more that you can give kids reasoning behind your rules and your expectations and what you're doing, within reason, the better. A lot of kids today are used to being treated like adults. So again, kind of like the top-down hierarchy doesn't really work well with this generation. Even if they're acting ridiculous, you want to try to talk to them like they're mature, and that tends to go over much better than the wagging the finger method. I think a lot of kids today are really missing out on a lot of encouragement, and they're missing out a lot of times on having relationships with their parents. So if you can be like a positive mentor in a student's life, and you can let them know that you really do care about them and that you want good things for them, and that the things that you're asking them to do is for their future and not just because their behavior is annoying you, sometimes that can help. There's an old saying, never let them see you sweat. I think that that is very true with this generation. You want to do your best to be confident and sure of yourself, even if you just have to pretend like you are, because it is very true. I think it's always been true, but I think especially true today. If they like sniff out a lack of confidence, you're like little fish in shark infested waters. So it's important to stand your ground in confidence, just with a kind demeanor instead of a drill sergeant demeanor. So hopefully the stage has been set. Let's get into some specific, concrete, practical solutions. And these are not going to be like earth shattering that you've never heard them before, but sometimes it's good to be reminded of them. So number one, you want to have crystal clear rules, procedures, and expectations. I found that I had to go over my rules and expectations over and over again because it's almost like maybe kids these days have been let down so much and have had so little consistency in their home lives that they just don't seem to absorb rules at all. You have to tell them over and over again and really stick with them. I would say have rules, procedures, and expectations posted all over your classroom. At the beginning of the year, I would recommend having students and their parents sign a contract with your rules, procedures, and expectations. I would have little discussions with the class about them, have them do turn-in talks with their neighbor where they discuss what the rules are and the whys behind them. You really want to lay that groundwork for like the first month of school. But even if you're seeing this later in the year, it's never too late to revisit them and kind of do a classroom rules revamp. Any area where there's ambiguity, certain personalities in your class are going to want to try to take it over and cause chaos. So the more structure you can have, the better. If possible, you want to have escalating consequences that are also very clear. For a lot of teachers, they have found like a 3-strike system to be really effective. Maybe the first strike is just a verbal warning. They're not in trouble. Nothing happens. The second strike could be moving a student away from the group where they need to reflect on what they've done. And maybe the third strike is something like a parent contact or in extreme situations being sent out of the room. But for a lot of teachers, especially either struggling teachers or beginning teachers, having that warning system helps. Some people will have like little tickets that they hand out that are warnings. Some people would do like check marks on the board. For younger elementary students, some people would have a clip chart. But generally speaking, I do think giving students some kind of warning for these kiddos these days is kind of helpful. If you're not allowed to do that verbally, you could even keep a checklist on a clipboard. You would be surprised how official a clipboard will make you feel. And you can just, when kids are acting up, start writing stuff on your clipboard and watch how silent the classroom gets when they realize what you're doing. And you can let them know like, hey, I'm keeping track of what's going on and how many times I have to talk to you. And there's going to be consequences if you're not able to follow through. And I found that to be pretty effective. Number 3 on my list, I can't remember if I said number 1 and number 2 for the last ones, but I am looking off of a list. So number 3 is call attention to good behavior and give rewards if possible. I eventually got to the point where I was so tired of getting in trouble for being quote unquote too negative that I was like, I'm going to be the most positive teacher anyone's ever seen in their life. So, I know that some people disagree with me for this, but I bought like mountains of candy and I gave rewards for everything. It even works with like older middle school kids. They love candy, stickers, pencils. You would be shocked. So whenever there was a way that I felt like I could get students motivated through rewards, I would go that route first. And for kids that just absolutely refuse to get on board, then I would go to consequences. But sometimes you don't even need to tangibly give anything. A lot of times kids are just looking for attention when they're misbehaving anyway. So if you can catch them being good and call positive attention to that, sometimes you might find that that actually helps with your difficult students. The thing that I realized really quickly as a teacher was that modern students, for the most part, were 100% lacking internal motivation. They really needed the instant gratification motivations of like candy, praise, rewards, points, whatever the case was. For a lot of people, they found that the class dojo system works really well for them. And if you're in a school that really frowns on any kind of like negative consequences, go the positive route and let the lack of a reward be the consequence. Number 4, strive to create a respectful culture in your room. What do I mean by that? You want to create a sense of community in your room. And so let's just say, for example, I taught English most of the years that I was a teacher. A lot of times kids would share their work, or they would, share reflections or just share their thoughts. So anytime there's a lot of sharing going on, you have to have a culture in your classroom where people support each other and they're kind and they're encouraging. And that is actually something that as a teacher you can create. And you do that by modeling being positive, being constructive, being affirming. And I would very quickly address whenever I felt like students weren't being respectful to their peers. And again, it's a lot of repetition and a lot of reminders and a lot of positive reinforcement. But with enough of that, a lot of your students are going to fall in line to what your expectations are. But if you're a teacher that lets things like kids making fun of each other or laughing at each other or saying things under their breath, if you let that slip, that kind of thing will quickly get out of control. And then kids aren't going to feel safe to share any of their thoughts or their work or their writing or anything in your classroom. So you get to really be the thermostat for your room and really set what is okay and what's not okay. Many years, I would create something called classroom core values, where I would very explicitly pick words out that were character traits and say that these are our core values for this classroom and this is what we strive to do here. And I would have kids do work around that. In some years, I would have like a classroom mission statement and I would have kids create their own mission statements. But if you take it seriously, I found that for the most part, kids will too. Number 5, call out and correct things that you don't like quickly. Now, this doesn't always have to be something where you're naming a student, but if let's say 2 to 3 students are doing the wrong thing and kind of everybody is noticing it, that would be a point where you would stop and say your reminder and your expectation again for the whole class. Just a reminder, we don't talk about the teachers talking, or just a reminder, our eyes should be on our papers. And that's a little bit of a way to address misbehavior without necessarily getting into confrontations with individual students. Number 6, talk to kids one-on-one whenever possible. I've already mentioned this earlier in the video, but just to reiterate, you really don't want to shame, blame, or embarrass kids publicly, because that really kind of paints a target on you and they become experts at revenge and retaliation, because kids' egos are very sensitive, just like, our adult egos are. And so we want to really, whenever we can, pull kids to the side and talk to them. There's a lot of times where I would actually step outside of the classroom and call a kid out to talk with me. And like I would have classroom monitors or different things watching and I'd be looking through the window. But there's just something about a kid having to look you in the eyeballs and you addressing what they're doing wrong in a kind and respectful way. But it also sends a message to all the other students in the classroom that, okay, this teacher takes misbehavior seriously. She's not just letting things slide. She's not ignoring them, but issues will be addressed. Number 7, don't get roped into power struggles. Some students will intentionally try to get you into an argument with them. So that's where you suggest during their own break time or free time that they come back and discuss the issue with you. You could could say something like, this is a really important discussion, but it's not the best time to have it now. So please come see me at recess or at the end of class or at the end of the school day before you get on the bus. And that quickly can de-escalate a tough situation. It also never helps to try to discuss things when a student is angry or when you're angry, because they're not thinking with their logical brain, they're thinking with their emotional brain. Number 8, keep parents in the loop, no matter the age of the students. I talk about this a little bit in the last video. I know that sometimes talking to parents is so hard, but you would be surprised how much talking to parents can make a difference, even with difficult parents and even with difficult students. Because even some of my most difficult kids did not want their parents called, even if their parent was like mean to me. Still, I think even though the kid wouldn't admit it and the parent wasn't going to tell me, kids still kind of got in trouble a little bit. So just make sure that you are letting parents know and communicating with them frequently about issues that are happening, especially continual issues that are happening in the classroom. And check out my last video if you want more tips on parent conversations. Number 9 is be the bigger person. Sometimes kids will get on your very last nerve and they're pushing all your buttons on purpose and they want nothing more than for you to have a meltdown. And that's where you just have to take a deep breath and say, you know what? I'm going to be the bigger person. I'm not ending up on a viral video for screaming and losing my mind in front of the class. I'm going to do the right thing. And like it or not, we do yield a lot of influence and power in kids' lives. And it is true that if you, in a moment of anger, say something that's mean or hurtful or purposely shame or embarrass a student, that's something that can actually stick with them for years. I can still remember some things that teachers said to me that like devastated me, and they had no idea. So keep the high ground, stay kind, stay classy, and don't let them make you lose your mind, okay? So the overall moral of the story is dealing with difficult students in this generation during this time is extraordinarily hard. So if you want to be a teacher and continue in the teaching profession, it's going to be really important for you to get your own winning strategy with how to deal with students. You want to keep yourself on the safe side by being kind, being positive, having conversations, doing your best within reason to build positive relationships with students and their families. And so much of your job these days centers around motivating the students when they're coming to school with no motivation. One thing that I completely forgot to mention that I did wrong for a lot of years of teaching was there was times when I actually wouldn't listen to kids because in my mind, they were doing the wrong thing. I saw that they did the wrong thing. I knew that they were doing the wrong thing, and I just didn't want to hear any excuses or anything that they had to say about it. I just wanted them to take the consequence and move on with their life. But that wasn't a beneficial strategy for many reasons. So I would encourage you whenever possible to listen to your students, even if you feel like they're just like lying or making up things or making up excuses, hear what they have to say. And I think so many kids don't feel heard today. They don't feel like they matter. So you could really be the difference in a lot of kids' lives. So I feel like this was a really long video. I am going to think about making shorter videos. I know that not everybody has time to listen to the whole thing, but if you stuck around for this long, thank you so much. Please consider liking and subscribing and commenting and sharing with your friends. And as always, let me know if there's any video ideas that you have. I am really hoping to get more consistent with making videos. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and we'll see you guys next time.